Hello, I'm Chris Slisher, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel, an intelligent, lively discussion about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. Timing is everything, and as the great wheel turns, we are best prepared when we are best informed. Join me as I explore concepts that allow us to broaden our view of the world. You'll hear interesting topics, meet fascinating guests, and discover who you really are. Using the time-tested practices of astrology, you'll learn how to accept change as the great wheel of life turns. Astrology, art, and spiritual adventure on Turning of the Wheel TV with Chris Slisher. Hello, and welcome to Turning of the Wheel. My name is Chris Slisher. As you know, this is a show about astrology, art, and spiritual adventure. And we're going to be talking about a different kind of astrology today. I've got a fascinating guest on, and we're going to be talking about, as I've mentioned in the past, astrology has many variants to it. There's lots of different kinds, but ultimately, despite the variation in them, they do sort of all come from this, they spring from the same well, and they certainly always bring us back to a sense of truth about who we are, why we're here, and all that. So that's what we're going to be getting into. My guest today is Raven Caldera.
Hello.
Thank you very much for coming on the show today. And he is a shamanic astrologer. And so we're going to be talking about how that is different and what that means. So what's the elevator speech for the shamanic astrology?
Elevator speech. Well, first, I want to say that I'm a Northern tradition shaman, which means that I practice the shamanism of ancient Northern Europe, moving into Eurasia. And that's the shamanism of my ancestors. And
is that Celtic by nature?
Mostly Norse Germanic, a little
okay.
Sami and little Western Siberian. So in that circumpolar area. And it's from the cold people place, the reindeer people place. And when you spend a lot of time staring at the sky. And I also just was introduced to astrology at a young age. And somewhere along the line, I was doing traditional Western astrology. And somewhere along the line, when I got deep into my shamanic studies, I realized that there were connections. And I started I talked to spirits, to various, many of them nature spirits. And they were saying, well, the sky is part of nature too. This is all part of the cosmic clock. It's all the same stuff. And as above, so below.
Right.
However, the things that make the shamanic astrology stand out, as it were, the defining characteristics of it, I'll go through them one at a time. And the first is stories. Shamans tell stories.
Right.
From the very earliest stages, we sit around the campfire and we tell stories.
Usually with a moral involved, right? Or some sort of
or some kind
lesson?
of some kind of enlightening something.
Enlightening, yeah.
This is a way of looking at the world. Here's a story, and it means something. It has something you can take with it, some kind of lesson in it. And to me, every piece of an astrological chart, the planet in a sign, the planet in a house, a planet in aspect to another planet, each of these is a separate story.
Yes, absolutely.
And there are a thousand myths out there. And one of the things that I do is I look at myths all over the world and figure out which little piece of this myth, which edifying bit of this myth really illustrates this. What is Saturn in Gemini?
Right.
What figure is that? What is Mars in the 7th house? What is Mars square Venus, this sort of thing.
That's really the only way to talk about astrology is to relate it to a story that we can get our heads around, sort of give it context.
And I find that telling it as a story and saying, okay, Moon in Aquarius, this is the story of the African story of the creator god Muitsi from Africa, or something like that. Moon square Mars is the story of Agamemnon versus Clytemnestra. I tell the story, and people say, oh, that's what's going on in my life.
If they can relate to it, they can translate the story. It's a matter of interpretation.
Yes.
And making that story like a template for your own life.
And it makes it real. It makes
and
it real
they all are cyclical as well. The stories repeat.
They do, and it's fascinating. And I'm always on the lookout for more stories and more ways to define this, that there are archetypal and transpersonal, and that you can step into that story and you can say, okay, I see right now I am being.
Yes.
Right now you're this in your chart, and my that in your chart means we're enacting Zeus and Hera, or we're enacting Odin and Frigga, or something like that, and that helps.
Like roles in a play.
Yes,
Yeah,
and we can choose. when we can see the archetypal grooves that we have fallen into, we can then choose what to do about them, and they don't just play us. So learning
So we can
these
look
stories,
to the historical context of those stories and how they played out through mythology, and then apply that to our own lives. Because all that's really changed is the time and place, the context. Because time, as we know, is that Helios going down the road, and so we're just different place and time, different scene.
Yes,
Yeah,
and as the sky goes round, these things in your chart get stimulated. That's what transits are all about.
Right.
And knowing when this sort of planet tends to aspect these things in my chart, I tend to fall into this, and I can make that a positive thing, or I can step out of it deliberately. I can watch for it. That helps you.
It does. It's being forewarned is being forearmed, as I always say, because when you have that forearm for information ahead of time, you are able to respond accordingly, because there is a negative way of coming out of things, and there's also a positive way. You can bounce off it, or you can just let it suppress. So it's very key.
Also, not just looking at stories, but looking at the natural world. Of course, there's the 4 elements, and very bound up with astrology, and also the Western magical traditions, and also shamanism, in the sense that earth, air, fire, water. What is this? These were our earliest things that we understood, and or solid, gas, liquid energy, if you want to put it that way. But seeing, for example, when I teach students first about, well, here's 3 fire signs, here's 3 earth signs, here's 3 water signs. Well, what's the difference between them? I can give them a lot of human characteristics.
Absolutely.
Or I can say, the first thing I say is, Taurus is the bedrock, Capricorn is the mountain, Virgo is the separate grains of sand in the desert. Or the separate grains of earth in the field. I can say Aries is a brush fire that you get out of the way of, moving across the plains. Leo is a bonfire that you gather around. Sagittarius is a lightning strike from above. This sort of thing. This gives people an idea, a natural world thing that they can connect to. When I'm feeling this is what it's linked to, and not just this symbolizes it, but it is actually really a part.
Right. And the thing about the elements that I love and I'm always drawn to myself is the fact that they are all we have. Everything that's on this planet is real. There's no such thing as artificial. Everything is real, whether we like it or not. It may be man-made and constructed of what we consider to be substitute items, but it's all on this planet. So the elements are all we have.
They are. And to think of when I am evincing the energy of this sign or this planet or something like that, I am embodying the energy of this natural force.
Right. Yep. Makes perfect sense.
That is part of how we look at it.
Yeah. It's fascinating. And then when you go beyond that, you said you have some other things about the shamanic astrology that is, so would you call it more nature-based?
It is very nature-based in that sense. It's
seasonal, has seasonal qualities to it.
Yeah, and absolutely. And in the European, the church that I belong to, the pagan church, we do the Celtic high holidays. Right. And if you notice where they are, they're the solstices and the equinox. They're placed by, they are just made up. They're the pattern of the sun. And the solstices and equinoxes are in the middle of the fixed signs.
And there's no small coincidence to that at all.
And the lines between them, so the ones between are in the fixed signs, and the solstices and equinoxes are on the line between the cardinal and mutable signs. So you have all 12 signs in these 8 holidays, and each of them is about the turning of the wheel and the seasons, quite literally, how the seasons turn and the natural things happen, and how you can see that reflected in the signs. And be prepared as well. That cyclical nature has a sense of recurrence, that you know that you're going to be going through a certain thing. And I think that in many cases, I've always thought that those of us who live in New England, or an area where we have strong seasons, we really benefit more from the changing of the seasons, as opposed to being in an area where seasons become somewhat neutral. I think we have more of a quality. I think, but even so, even in places where seasons are, where there's fewer changes, I think if you're really in tune with the nature, you can see what's going on.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
you know when it's spring and when it's the rainy season, when it's the
exactly.
So it will vary in that way. But I think tying it to the actual turning of the year is very important.
It goes back to, the earliest people, when paganism first came about, it was about the idea of following the seasons. That's all they had to go with. All they had to go with was what their natural world was. So it's very logical that it would follow the same sort of patterns.
Yes, as an example of that, the fall equinox. I think that's one of the times of year people really don't know what to do with, but it's right in line between Virgo and Libra.
Yeah.
And Virgo is the accountant, and Libra is the judge.
The judge.
With the scales, and this is the harvest time. And we call it the reckoning day. And this is the time when you use both the combination of Virgo and Libra to sort things out and figure out if you're going to have enough to survive the winter.
Exactly.
And dole that out to people. And so just knowing that that is how our ancestors handled that.
So in our modern world, we sort of forget some of these ancient threads that sort of set in place patterns that we continue to espouse. You know, we don't really ever lose these characteristics. We may have a different form of, we may not be, you know, harvesting grain and balancing on a scale, but we have other metaphors that apply to that and make sense in that regard.
Another way in which the shamanic astrology is a little different from especially psychologically based Western astrology. I am often disappointed in the current push of Western astrology to become as non-occult and non-spiritual as possible for scientific acceptance, and saying that okay, there's nothing magical or woo-woo about this at all. It's just science and psychology. And that is not my worldview. I'm an animist and a polytheist and a person who lives every life aware of the spiritual currents. And so you go to an astrologer like that, and they'll tell you what the trend is, what might come, what's the possibilities, and how to maybe get out of the way. But they don't give you anything to change it, to do anything about it. And if you go to an astrologer in a traditional culture, they will give you something to do. They will give you something to wear or to say or to do. Yes, and so an example of that is Vedic astrology. If you go there, they'll give you jewelry and remedies, actions to take. And people say, well, what actions could you possibly take? With shamanic astrology, well, the first thing is each sign and planet and house they all have colors. They all have animals and birds and plants and trees and stones and physical, real-world things that are associated with them, and you can make yourself a mojo bag of that. I need more of this in my life, or I've got this coming, and I'm worried about it. So I'm going to make a bag of that, with this color and this plant and leaves from this tree and the figure of this animal, and you can also make an altar to that, not because that force is a deity, it's not, but because it's like saying to the universe, all right, I'm going to make this meditation altar. I'm going to have symbols. I'm going to have both associated symbols, like the colors and the trees and the plants, and also just symbols that mean something to me. Saturn coming into my whatever house, what does that mean on a larger scale? I'll put magazine pictures up there. I'll make a little meditation altar about that, and then I will sit in front of it.
So it sort of provides you with a visual reminder to bringing you, grounding you in some ways.
Yes.
Bringing you back to giving you a visual touchstone from which to draw your emphasis. And in many ways, what we're seeing is a departure from this kind of world, because in our busily distracted world, we have sort of lost many of these characteristics. But these are very much primal. They are part of our roots, our DNA. We can't ignore them.
And part of the reason for meditating, even if it's a challenging thing, is to really grok it, really understand it on a deep level. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to meditate on this, and I'm going to get why the universe does this. What does this, not in a good, bad way, and good, bad often is convenient or inconvenient to us, but just in a cosmic, natural level, what does this look like? What does this feel like, this energy of, say, Saturn in your whatever house? And then the remedy is, once you've understood this, you go out and you do something. You are the universe's hands to make things better in some way that reflects that. For example, if it's a Saturn problem, working with the elderly or the disabled or something like that, doing something that reflects the sign, the house, the planet, and says, I get it. I get what this energy means, and I'm going to go out and do something good in the world for this energy, and that does make a difference.
It sure does.
You still have that transit, but it means that the universe is
well, you're being proactive.
You.
You're just sort of using it. It's kind of like the idea of judo. When the energy is coming towards you, you use the judo to bring it back and harness it back. And Saturn can be a difficult transit.
I actually call Saturn the sensei. It's the sensei in the dojo of hard knocks.
Yeah, but I enjoy Saturn. I enjoy Saturn because I know Saturn keeps us honest. It keeps us on track, it keeps us on path, and we don't ever lose it. And we get our work done, and then there's always a reward at the end when we're dealing with the Saturn transit.
The reason I think of Saturn as a sensei is because what does the sensei do? He has you do things you don't understand, repeating situations over and wax on, wax off, wax on. You're like, why am I doing this? Why am I going through this again and again? And then to see if you've learned it, because he wants you to survive, he wants you to succeed, but his way of seeing if you've learned it is to run up and hit you. And either you block, or you get knocked down. And usually you whine and you say, oh, you knocked me down. Get up, wax on, wax off again. And
but through those lessons, everything is reinforced.
Yes.
The lesson is learned, and you don't really leave a Saturn transit without learning something.
Absolutely.
You come away very strongly. Whether if Saturn is transiting your second house, for example, you're going to be, cutting your cable bill. You're going to be saving money. You're going to be putting plastic on your windows, whatever it may be, in an effort to be more responsible with your money. So it's very valid. And this is our connection with the cosmos and our natural cycle of things as we go through our daily lives are very rooted in all of these very primal qualities. And I think we lose track of it. And it's important that we don't lose track of them. That's I think what you really are bringing about is this idea of, being in touch with reality, understanding where we are, why we're here, how to work in concert with the planet, as opposed to trying to oppose it and running away from it.
I think it's easy to, especially with the harder planets like Saturn or Pluto or Chiron or something like that, it's easy to see them as the enemy that's coming to get you, and you have to hide, or you have to endure, you have to endure the blows. And working with them, saying, all right, there's something you want me to learn here, I'm going to get on that.
Right. And I think Saturn actually is your best friend in many ways, because it keeps you honest, it makes you clean up your room, and makes you get your act together. And even people often many astrologers think of Jupiter as the great benefic planet, but what it also does is it amplifies. So if you're in the midst of a problem and you've got Jupiter going through your planet, your chart at that time, it's going to amplify whatever it does. It sort of brings a sense of largesse.
And I've often seen, I think the nicest thing you can have in a chart is a positive aspect to Saturn.
Yeah.
In a trine or a sextile to Saturn, because that gives you the ability to be disciplined about whatever it's contacting. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful aspect to have.
It's sort of like the responsible, dutiful person.
Yeah, it's
the just getting the job done, doing the right thing.
And one of the most dangerous aspects to have actually is Jupiter is a square to Jupiter, because that's overdoing.
Right.
That's like, well, the little's fine. A million times that is even better, and you
Not
get
necessarily.
all kinds of.
You can be too responsible, and you can be too dutiful, and you can go overboard, and you can go invade countries and stuff like that. Right.
Or with Jupiter squares, you can be out of control.
Yeah.
You can and think that that's okay. I'm just expressing myself.
Right.
All over everyone else.
Right. Exactly. But I think that the bottom line really is being apprised of what your natural chart is. And we all have this natural fingerprint, this natural sort of owner's manual of where our planets are on our charts. And we want to be able to understand them and work with them. And if you work with them in concert with the time of where we are today in the world, or in the period of time, the session, it brings about some much more concrete ability to work in a way where we have a much different sense of reality, and we have stability. These things all bring about a stabilizing, because we're working with the universe as opposed to against the universe.
Yep. And that's basically what shamanic astrology is. Shamanism
Much
is
more pagan-oriented than earth-oriented,
yes,
for lack of a better word.
Shamanism is an animistic worldview. It's a worldview where everything in nature is alive, not just animals and not just plants. I think a lot of people will admit animals are alive, mostly. They'll barely admit plants are alive, but they don't act like it. But they won't talk about the streams, the rivers, the mountains, the earth itself has spirit. The idea is all these things have spirit.
And we have a relationship with all of them.
We do.
We can't discount that. We have to be in relationship with everything. Everything in the world is about relationship, regardless. It's either positive or negative, but we are always in a relationship, a reflective quality with all things and all beings at all time.
And the idea is to be in right relationship with all these things.
Exactly.
With the land that you live on, with the air that you breathe,
right.
With where you get your energy, and also with Saturn, with Neptune, with Jupiter, with these forces that are part of nature. They're part of they're the cosmic clock, the underlying thing, and we need to be in harmony with them, even when they are hard. Sometimes being in harmony with the hurricane means you got to batten down, or leave the area out of respect or something like that. But you still have to be in some kind of relationship with it. And if you are in a combative relationship with a hurricane or a planetary force, you're just going to hurt yourself, because it's bigger than you.
You're not going to win.
Yeah, and so it's you that will be hurt, and so finding a way for you to be in some kind of more harmonious relationship with it.
What I always say is that I always use the example of Pluto. When I think of Pluto as Pluto transit, I think of a leaking roof. And if the leak did not if the roof did not leak, we would not fix it. But guess what? The roof is leaking, so we have to fix it. Sort of that forcing function that gets us out there. We've got to fix the roof. The roof is leaking. We can't ignore this. Or the house is on fire, we've got to put it out.
I love Pluto, actually. Pluto is one
I
of
do
the
too.
big, strong planets in my chart, and aspecting practically everything, and it's transformation.
It's transformation. It's about coping with the difficult choices in life. It's about regeneration. It's very, it's got that Scorpio quality of regeneration and beginning anew and rising from the ashes. It's a very strong.
And what we don't like to look at is the fact that in order to be born, you have to go through labor.
Yes.
And in order to rise from the ashes, there has to be a fire that burns everything down. So it is as much part of the painful destruction as it is the rebirth, and you cannot have one without the other.
You can't have one without the other. And people, I think Western society has a tendency to sort of, sidestep the whole characteristic of death, even though death is very much of a part of the cycle. It's the other end of the wheel. We can see it in all the symbology of all the major ancient primal religions and practices. It's there. So Pluto, I think, is a very strong characteristic. And so when you are looking in with the views of the shamanic astrologer, I very much subscribe to what you're talking about, by the way. I spend a lot of time working with elements and their characteristics because I do believe that there's a real earthbound quality to that, and we can't ignore that. And it concerns me that we, as a general populace, I guess, are getting a little bit far away from that. That's sort of concerning to me.
Well, we don't connect with nature. I mean, we think,
Right.
okay, I'm walking in a park. Oh boy, I'm connecting with nature. What that means is I'm breathing clean air, and I'm not hearing honking and noise, and therefore I'm connecting with nature. No, are you looking at the plants and you're noticing the ecosystem? Are you seeing who came here? What was happening? Where are there bare patches? What's going on here? Well, even if you were, you probably wouldn't know what you were looking at. And our long ago ancestors would have known. They would have walked through an area and they would have known everything that was going on in that area.
And they would be self-sufficient. They could survive without a phone. They could survive on their own. They could survive on their wits just based on what they knew of the natural elements that they were around them. And I think we've gotten far away from that in our own distracted world. And it concerns me because I find that that's what we're missing in many ways. It's that return to the one, the return to the primal sense. And we may very well be headed towards that. I mean, we have a big transit coming up in 2020 where we have Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto together in Capricorn. I think that's going to be sort of an awakening of sort of a crescendo, if nothing else.
The past 20 years have given us a lot of interesting Capricorn stuff going on.
They certainly have. And Capricorn Pluto is where Capricorn is right now.
Yes, it is.
Or Capricorn is where Pluto is, I should say.
Capricorn is where Pluto is.
And Pluto it will tear down and rebuild. And so we may very well be seeing, not to overstate this, but the fall of a certain kind of civilization or mode of operation, perhaps, coming to an end and a new era, a new epoch on its way.
There's that. I often see the Pluto and Capricorn thing as the great corporations.
Yes. And the politicians, the big figures, the people crumbling down, the big sort of foundational pillars that we all look up to, like the what's his name, Bill Cosby, and people like that. People who we've sort of admired, they come crumbling down. These figures that we see in our national sort of our national stage. These figures that we've held in high regard. Whoever you want to pick out of the hat, there's thousands of them. Tiger Woods, all these people who come out, whoever they are crumbling, and they're sort of having their time. It's a sort of a harbinger of a gradual deterioration of a status or of a plan that has outlived its purpose in some way.
One of the really important things in shamanic astrology is the moon.
Yes.
Because you can go out and see it.
Yeah.
And
beautiful thing. I've got moon in Cancer, so I love it.
Yes, my wife has moon in Cancer, actually. But I like to do a lot with the moon and looking at it, not only its signs but its phases.
Yes.
And one of the great things about looking at moon astrology, there's 8 phases and there's 12 signs, and that's 96.
And it changes every month.
Well, every couple of days.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes every few hours.
Yeah.
So that's 96 moons. That's 96 different moons, and each one of them has a different feel to it. And actually, I figured that out, and I said, wait a minute, 96. That's a number that's made up of crescents and circles.
Yes.
And it looks like
69,
the Cancer,
right? Exactly.
The Cancer
Perfect.
sign.
Yeah,
yes.
great. I love that.
And it's like there's something to this.
Yeah.
This means something. But but I've learned. I'm learning. It's a constant, ongoing thing. So
That's why I call it practicing.
Yes,
practicing astrology. There's so much to learn. Just the way a doctor can't learn everything, we are slowly working our way, filling up our vaults with information and knowledge and ideas.
But it's good for me to go out and look at the moon and say, I can see from where it is in the sky what phase it's in. I can figure from where it is with the sun as to what sign it's in, and that tells me which of the 96 moons it is. Look, that's a liar's moon. That's going to mean something. That's a sea mother's moon. That's going to mean something. That means that for this period of time, even if it's only today, it's giving off a particular energy that we can find in our lives, and we can use that. And that's just a matter of walk outside and look.
And when you act accordingly, with, and you are in rhythm with the moon, as I always am, and you know where it is, and you're living your life accordingly, you will find that your emotions have a sense of, and your daily patterns have a sense of logic to them that this makes sense. And you can sort of tease this larger story. So it does require a certain loftier look. You've got to be able to remove yourself from sort of the mundane characteristics of your daily life. We all have this churn we go through. We've got our bills to pay. We've got to put gas in the car and all that stuff. But we have to also acknowledge this sort of this greater thing. And I think we're entering into a period, as I mentioned, one of my other segments about Neptune and Pisces, where we're going to have this greater awareness of our ability to have this greater subconscious, sort of this rising up of this appreciation for the esoteric arts and the characteristics that come as a result. So.
Yeah, so I encourage people to just go out and look at the moon and learn what the different phases are. And people talk about the full moon being loony, being where the crazies come out, but actually, statistically, the first and third quarters are where the most accidents happen. Because they're a very challenging
Waxing and
period.
waning, right? Yeah, you're sort of in that flux, or in the void of course, as well. The void of course moons, was it not a good time to have things done, major operations or whatever?
Elect politicians.
Right.
Not so good at that point.
And we've seen a lot of interesting situations there. So any other quick summaries that you think of when it comes to shamanic astrology and points that are salient?
Well, I really love what one author wrote about, while the signs are not gods, treating them as though they were a force to be propitiated, and sort of like build a temple to the god who is oppressing you, kind of. And that's somebody else said that, but the idea of being able to say, I think it's really important to be able to say, you are not oppressing me, you are trying to teach me something, and I'm going to build you a temple in my heart, in my soul, in my life for this period of time that this is going on, or eternally if it's in your chart. And that will be this place that I go to understand what it is that you're trying to teach, even when it's hard, even when it's the doorway is covered in broken glass. I will come into this place anyway, and building that inner temple to that force in your life.
Well, there's a basic underlying characteristic that I think many of us avoid, and that is the overarching theme that life is truly difficult. That is a premise. That is a fact. That is a worldwide truth. Life is difficult. What astrology does, what regular astrology does, what shamanic astrology does, is it puts us into an arena whereby we are able to better cope and learn the lessons and evolve and use the energy to our better end.
But life is also beautiful.
It is.
And the real world, which I conceive of as the green stuff outside, green, brown, blue, that's the real world. And that is where the beauty really is.
Yes, it is. It truly is. And it's an amazing thing to have that. My guest today has been Raven Caldera, and we've been talking about shamanic astrology and man's dialogue with the earth and getting back to the earth in a way that is meaningful and not wrapped up in some sort of mechanical electronic device. We need to be in touch with the planet. We need to go out and touch that earth, walk on that earth, drink that water, watch that sky, and be at one with the world. So thank you very much for coming on today. It's been great having you on. Always fun to talk these great topics. So thank you for listening, folks, and we'll see you again in another episode down the road. Raven Caldera. Thank you.